Video game graphics have changed immeasurably through the years. Just compare then to now. It's crazy. In fact, don't even expend the effort. We'll do it for you. Hi folks, it's Falcon, and today on gameranx, 10 video game graphics then versus now. At number 10, it's Gran Turismo 7 versus Gran Turismo 1997. Oh my god. So the video game market, obviously, it's always rapidly changing and evolving, so 1997 might as well be ancient history, right? But that's the year that on December 23rd, Gran Turismo, the original, released for PlayStation 1. It was one of the first games officially designed to support the DualShock controller, which, if you didn't know, came later. The original design of the PlayStation controller had only a directional pad, and the twin sticks didn't happen until later. Now, this game was a massive success and spawned a hit series that's still churning out great games today. Gran Turismo 7 on the PlayStation 5 is a graphical powerhouse. It's got some of the most realistic vehicles ever created for a game, some insane polygon counts. Each vehicle has like 500,000 each. Compare that to the original, and you can count the number of polygons on each car with your fingers. Well, maybe not, but you can count them from looking at them, that's for sure. The original PlayStation could render a total of 360,000 polygons per second, meaning if a game was running at 30 frames per second, it could handle about 12,000 polygons per frame. And that's without other stuff going on. Basically, anytime you play a PlayStation game, you're not seeing 12,000 polygons per frame, period. That's if the only thing it's doing is rendering polygons at 30 frames per second. So, Gran Turismo 7 has these crazy realistic environments, just blow the basic blocky locations of the original game out of the water. It's one of those series that thrives on realism, and, well, in 1997, this was really actually quite impressive. Every new entry obviously surpasses the previous one, and we're a ways in. Yes, I know there are a lot of people who love PlayStation's low poly visuals, but I don't think there's any denying that this series has benefited from the massive improvements in graphical technology we've seen in the last 2.5 decades. Like, it's kind of hard to imagine the idea that the original Gran Turismo actually was a graphical powerhouse at its time. But, I mean, look at this. It obviously could look worse. And keep in mind, we're emulating this at modern resolutions, so it looks better here than it did on the PlayStation, but still, polyphony digital has really always been on the cutting edge with graphics and stuff. It's just a perfect example of the fact that what was considered impressive back then just is nothing now. And number 9 is Star Wars Jedi Survivor versus Star Wars Jedi Knight 2 from 2003. Battle of the Star Wars Jedi sequels. Few media properties have been really massively connected to video games in the way Star Wars has. The first Star Wars game came out in '83. That's when Return of the Jedi came out, just for reference. So that's about 40 years they've been consistently releasing these things. If I really wanted to, I could take this way back to the Atari 2060 or the ColecoVision or whatever, but I don't think there's any point in comparing those visuals to today's. I mean, it's categorically different. It's not even looking at two examples of the same thing, really. So let's have some fun here and instead compare the visuals of Jedi Survivor, an undeniably great-looking game that at time of writing is suffering some pretty severe issues on the PC, and Jedi Knight 2 Jedi Outcast. So, Jedi Outcast was developed by Raven Software using id Tech 3, the engine that powered Quake 3 and games like that. This was actually the basis for the IW engine still used today in the Call of Duty franchise. Obviously, it's heavily modified, but there's still something of id's code in there. Jedi Survivor, on the other hand, was developed by Respawn Entertainment using the Unreal Engine 4, and it's pretty interesting how these two games parallel one another. Jedi Knight 2 uses the Quake engine and was developed by Activision, while Jedi Survivor used the Unreal Engine and was developed by EA. Respawn was created by former Call of Duty developers, while Raven is actually still trapped in the Call of Duty mines. None of this is really relevant, but it's interesting how these games kind of intersect. Graphically, Jedi Knight 2 actually was pretty good, but it wasn't really blowing people away in 2003 even, which I guess is kind of similar to Jedi Survivor. Survivor looks amazing, obviously, but at a level we've come to expect from AAA games. Of course, everything from the facial animations to the environmental detail blows Jedi Knight 2 out of the water, but it's always funny looking at these old video game cutscenes. They're so amateur in their staging and composition compared to modern games, which look like movies now. The facial animations were weird even back then, and the facial animation in Jedi Survivor is the best in the business. Part of this comes from the fact that even though there was a lot of reference from movies and other media, video game developers just weren't used to the idea of creating things cinematically. That experience has come over the years. The environments are just so much bigger in Jedi Survivor. The lightsaber fights are cinematic compared to Jedi Knight 2's kind of awkward flailing. But one thing they do have in common is you could actually chop off limbs. You had to do it with a code in Jedi Knight 2, but it's there. I mean, I could go on all day about the similarities between these games and the differences too, but we've got a list to get through, so let's just move on. And number 8 is Resident Evil 4 from 2023 versus, well, Resident Evil 4 from 2005. I don't think you can make a list like this without taking a look at these particular games. So Resident Evil 4 was an amazing looking game in 2005, and it's actually held up pretty well over the years, but there's not really a basis for saying it holds up compared to the remake. Certain things in Resident Evil 4 actually still look very good. And honestly, I think I prefer some of the reloading animations from the original game compared to the remake. But looking back at it now, the original had very blurry textures, muddy environments, and surprisingly low poly enemies. It's one of these things you just didn't notice back then, I guess. Oh yeah, and you can't strafe or move while aiming. That's the part that really stands out to people playing this one for the first time. Keep in mind, the game predates the first Gears of War. It did establish a lot of third-person shooting ideas that other games ran with, but that's a thing. Obviously, in the remake, you can move. Leon's faster, he's more reactive, and it's kind of jarring and an exhilarating change compared to the original. I think what makes the remake work so well is they weren't afraid to change things up once in a while. It's overly a very faithful remake, but there was room to improve things, and Capcom wasn't afraid of it. What we're really talking about is the graphics, though, and just look at the graphics in the remake. Like, one thing that stands out to me is how much gloomier and spookier the remake's visuals are. The overcast sky, the ramshackle houses, the thick layers of fog give this game an almost fairy tale atmosphere that just was not there in the original. Like, they were kind of just relying on the fact that it looked dingy and unwelcoming in the original, and they full force went in and said, all right, how do we set mood, tone, etc. completely? And they overall created, in my opinion, a moodier and slightly creepier experience. Details are obviously much higher everywhere you look, like with most games, but the real standouts here are the character models. I think they did a great job at taking the models from the original game and updating them so they're immediately recognizable, but look way more like real people. They're obviously pushing polygons like you'd expect, but I think the atmospheric changes also really stand out, and it is a top-notch remake. Not the only one we're going to talk about, though. At number 7 is the Dead Space remake versus the original Dead Space from 2008. When I first heard they were remaking Dead Space, I thought, did that just come out? And I've said this a couple of times, but I went back and it's 2008. That's almost 15 years ago. And the thing is, the original was a real graphical standout at the time. Easily one of the best looking games of the year. And for the time, the character models and animations were just among the best. The Dead Space remake is different from the Resident Evil 4 remake because it's almost strictly accurate. Most of the environments are exactly the same, just a lot more detailed. And it's a credit to the original game's environmental design that they kept the remake so close while still being able to make it look amazing. I'm not going to downplay all the smart gameplay environments that they brought to the remake, but the level design is almost one-to-one at times, which is perfect for a list like this. Necromorphs, way more grotesque this time around. I'm not sure how much I can actually show, like, easily, and also just how gross it is, but the way their flesh peels off their skin is disgustingly impressive. It's one of those games that's perfect for showing off just how far graphics have come in the past decade and a half, because the original game holds up, and the remake doesn't look that different, but still somehow blows it out of the water. It's easy to be cynical and say games peaked in the Xbox 360 era or whatever, but this remake really shows how far we've come in terms of environmental effects and animations. And part of it is because of how good the original stands up this much later. And number 6 is LEGO Star Wars: The Skywalker Saga versus LEGO Star Wars from 2005. Might be hard to believe now, but when LEGO Star Wars first came out, people didn't think it would do well. Obviously, that turned out to be very wrong, but at the time, these games were a bit of a weird idea. The first game, obviously not a graphical showcase. Obviously, most LEGO games were pretty modest in their visuals, right? In that regard, the Skywalker Saga was a pretty huge step forward. For one thing, massive undertaking that somehow combines all 9 movies into one story. story, and every single planet is made open for exploration. And it's kind of crazy how much better the Skywalker Saga looks. I mean, yeah, that first game was for PlayStation 2, and of course the PS5 powered one's gonna look better, but it's not just from pure polygons. The art direction is a lot better too. The original game mostly got by on the appeal of just being able to play the Lego characters, but the Skywalker Saga's animations and art, like, they're put up there with the animated movie. Now, keep in mind, the Skywalker Saga also benefits from having existed after the Lego movie did. That, I think, is pretty much not only when the Lego people figured out what CG animated Lego stuff should look like, it's also, to be frank, a landmark film in terms of animation. It has had a large amount of influence on what non-realistic animation looks like, both in video games and movies since then. But it's not just the characters that look better here either. It's also the environments, effects, lighting, all that stuff looks way better. In comparison to other games on this list, it doesn't have like the best visuals or anything, but the jump from PS2, Xbox to now is so huge, it's really fun to compare. And number 5 is Dead Island 2 versus Dead Island, which came out in 2011. You know what's honestly really shocking here? That the sequel to Dead Island, which was announced in 2014, actually came out. And particularly shocking is that it's really not bad. Like, the original Dead Island wasn't a masterpiece or anything, but it did have some really great environmental design, especially in the first area set in the tropical resort. That still looks pretty good even today. It's not pushing polygons like modern games and environmental effects. It looks a little flat, but think about how most Xbox 360 era games looked. The original Dead Island did a great job of making some of its environments look realistic in a way not a lot of games really have. Like, even today, games feel the need to clutter every environment up with as much stuff possible, which can look impressive, but it doesn't always look realistic. Dead Island 2, on the other hand, really did a good job expanding on what Dead Island 1 did right. Many of the locations, while not directly based on anything, look almost photorealistic at times, especially under the right lighting. Character models in Dead Island 2 are, of course, a lot better, but the real star of the show is the zombies. The zombies at Dead Island 2 are nasty, and the things you can do to them are even nastier. Zombies' heads cave in when you bash them, limbs tear open when you slice them, jaws hang off their faces when you hit them. The kind of damage you can do in this game to a human body, well, what is left of one, is disgusting, and I'm not sure, again, how much we can show exactly. We do like getting paid for doing work. But compared to the relatively dull zombies from the first game, it is a huge improvement. Like, the Dying Light games would be a more direct comparison to the original Dead Island, made by the same developer, but I personally think Dead Island 2 is just an overall better looking game than Dying Light 2. Maybe not as ambitious, but better looking. Number 4 is Metroid Prime Remastered versus Metroid Prime. This is one that just came out of nowhere. Metroid Prime came out in 2002, Metroid Prime Remastered, very recent, and it's great. It's not Resident Evil 4 Remake or even the Dead Space Remake, because unlike those games, hardly anything was changed besides the graphics. It's in every way a one-to-one recreation of the original game, but with visuals that are shockingly similar, actually, in visuals. The funny thing is that the original, which came out for the Nintendo GameCube, still holds up in terms of art design. It's not pushing a lot of polygons, but it looks still good, honestly. The remaster takes all of that and just improves. If you haven't played the original in a long time, you might not even notice how much better the new version looks, but check out the side-by-side. Wow, 20 years can make a big difference. What's also funny is that we're going from what was cutting edge in 2002, GameCube, to Switch, which is pretty outdated in 2023. Still, huge graphical updates, and the Switch is pushing some nice frame rates, let's just go ahead and say, in this. One thing that really stands out, though, is how much more atmospheric everything is in the Switch version. The thick layer of fog when you first enter the space station, it's so much more ominous than the 2002 version. The level of detail is consistent for the entire remaster. It's not too far off from the original, and again, the reason the original holds up, I think, is the art direction, and and it's also the reason why, if you haven't seen the original recently, you might not even realize that there's a huge improvement, and that's a testament to the original's art direction. But wow, there is a huge improvement. And number 3 is Elden Ring versus King's Field. King's Field came out in '94. Kind of unfair, honestly. The obvious choice would be to compare Elden Ring to Demon's Souls, that first breakout title from PlayStation 3. But we've already compared that game with its remake, which is frankly visually much, much better. So let's cast that net a little wider and go all the way back to From's first game. In many ways, King's Field are the precursors to the entire Souls formula. They've got large, mysterious, non-linear worlds, NPCs that are weird, like really, really weird, and sometimes pretty brutal difficulty. Released on the original PlayStation in '94, the first King's Field never actually left Japan, and the later games failed to make much of a mark in the Western market. These are clunky, weird games that are just obtuse, and they're also first person instead of third. But beyond that, the gameplay at its core isn't that different. Now, in comparison, From is at the height of their power with Elden Ring. It's a massive open world adventure, but it still retains that mysterious tone and sometimes obtuse mechanics that make these games so engrossing to people. But in terms of visuals, night and day. Almost qualitatively different. Like, we're almost in the categorically not comparable turf here. But they're both 3D, right? So on one hand, you got the epic vistas of Elden Ring. On the other, the endless blocky hallways of King's Field. The game was rudimentary even for its time. The PlayStation 1 was capable of a lot more than this. The funny thing is, even though Elden Ring has beautiful visuals, it's also not really pushing hardware to its limits. The visuals, in terms of pure detail, pretty modest compared to a lot of other games that have been on this list so far. What makes up for it is the stellar world design, but compared to the Demon's Souls remake, that game actually kind of has better visuals. This is kind of just to highlight how far From has come from its humble beginnings, from like basic hallways to massive, unforgettable worlds and the lands between. And number 2, Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart versus the original Ratchet and Clank in 2002. Now, Insomniac is another studio that's come a very, very long way. From Spyro to the first Ratchet and Clank to Spider-Man, they've evolved really well over the last few decades into a powerhouse. They've always been pushing the boundaries of what's possible with PlayStation systems, and a good way to highlight that is the original Ratchet and Clank from 2002 to the newest sequel from 2021. One thing I always remember is that the first was actually able to render these massive vistas whenever you landed on a new planet. No other PlayStation game was really doing stuff like that while keeping a high frame rate, but man, they pulled it off. That big zoomed out opening shot was a staple of the series, and Rift Apart shows how far the technology has come. I know I've said how certain games look like animated movies now, but Rift Apart, I think that may be more true than with any other game. The animation and character models are just incredible, and a lot of the effects the game throws at you, it's really a PlayStation 5 showcase. The original game is a lot more humble in comparison. What really stands out with the older game is how ugly the character design is. It just doesn't have the appeal of later Ratchet games. Even compared to contemporaries like Jak and Daxter, the character models don't look great. I'm sure that there are people out there that prefer this rougher, less refined style, but to me it just looks amateurish. Everything is still quite impressive though, like the scale of the levels, with the fast loading times, the smooth frame rate was just something that Ratchet did better than pretty much everybody else on PS2. Funny thing is for a series that's been going for 20 years, the basic gameplays remain mostly the same. You're still exploring planets, still blasting enemies, smashing crates with a wrench. It just looks way better every release. Yeah, you got a dodge move and you can strafe now, but what you're doing in Rift Apart is mostly the same, and that's 20 years of development. And finally, at number 1 is Red Dead Redemption 2 versus Red Dead Revolver. But it's so obvious, I don't know why we haven't talked about this one before, in fact. On the one hand, you got Rockstar's magnum opus, Red Dead Redemption 2, one of the most beautiful, detailed, and atmospheric games ever made. And on the other, you got the humble Red Dead Revolver, a canceled Capcom game that Rockstar bought and finished for a quick turnaround back in 2004. The first Red Dead has almost nothing in common with the series that it would eventually become. It's a very linear action game where you swap between multiple characters, fighting a variety of cartoonish village. The Japanese origins of the game are unmistakable, from the way the story plays out to the hub-based mission design. Whereas RDR2, 100% Rockstar. A meticulously created open-world epic that's not afraid to slow down and take things at its own pace. The visuals, especially with the environmental design, it's just jaw-dropping, even today. And it's not like a new game, you know? But the snowy mountains, the verdant hills, the bustling city, all rendered with an unprecedented level of care and detail.
Okay, gentlemen, listen up, all of you. According to the information so kindly provided to us by the O'Driscolls, the train will be coming north from Big Valley. We're gonna pick it off after it crosses the border into the Grizzlies.
All these years later, I think Red Dead 2 is best-in-class open-world environment design. Every location just looks so amazingly good. Red Dead Revolver, on the other hand, is functional. Most of the levels in these games are rough and barren looking, even for a game at its time. Character models have blurry textures. Sometimes they really don't look good. Gameplay-wise, it's really arcadey. I enjoy it, but it's just run through the level and shoot anything that moves. And there's a boss fight at the end. Graphics and gameplay have very little, almost nothing in common with Red Dead Redemption. Basically, the only thing that connects these games is an Easter egg mention of red in the first RDR game and the title. That's about it. But wow, very different games, very different graphics. That's all for today. Leave us a comment. Let us know what you think. If you like this video, click like. If you're not subscribed, now's a great time to do so. We upload brand new videos every day of the week. The best way to see them first is, of course, a subscription, so click subscribe. Don't forget to enable notifications. And as always, thank you very much for watching this video. I'm Falcon. You can follow me on Twitter, Falcon the Hero. We'll see you next time right here on gameranx.